Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I have a repeat offender back on the show. One of my favorite people in life, Sarah Stremming. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marissa. I'm ready to offend again.
I know. I was like, that's not the right word, but
I mean, it could be. It depends on who you ask, I guess.
That's true. That is true. We are going to talk about, and really I'm talking to Sarah about this because Sarah has way more experience about this topic than a lot of people, but especially me. So, I mean, it's true.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's 1,000,000% true because I have only been a single dog household. I mean, that's not true. I've had stints of dogs living together, like months at a time, but for the most part, I have been a single dog household. So,
and I have lived with up to 8 at a time.
8 dogs. And not even like, I don't want to just talk about breeds right now.
But I'm just going to say they ain't Labradors.
They ain't 8 Chihuahuas, right? They're border collies. And why am I forgetting?
An Australian Shepherd, and
that's right, Australian Shepherd.
Sheepdog.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll have a little project, like a little pug mix in there.
Yeah. So easy peasy stuff.
No big deal.
No big deal. So we're going to talk about supporting the relationship between the dogs in the house. And this was a topic that was requested by a listener that I thought was a really, really excellent topic. We're not necessarily going to be addressing like if there's aggression in the home, right? Like we're not planning on doing that necessarily.
This would be the prevention for.
That's what okay, great. We're on the same page here.
Some of these things might be included in a BMOD plan for intra-household aggression, but we aren't really talking about intra-household aggression. We're talking about supporting and maintaining good relationships, or if you see that the relationship is maybe on thin ice, supporting it better.
Yeah. So before we move on, what would thin ice look like?
Yeah. So number one, I am an anxious person who thinks everything will go poorly, right? So
same.
For me, I don't even need to see signs if I know what the recipe often is for disaster. And I do know what the recipe often is. And it looks like this. You have more than one dog with really big feelings about resources, really big feelings about one particular person in the house. And it doesn't have to be the same person. One dog can have big feelings about one person and the other dog can have big feelings about the other. Dogs with, generally speaking, like bigger, louder personalities, which are the dogs that I like. And then I'm just going to say it, bitches.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So when you've got more than one female dog in the house, here's the thing. Girl dogs don't fight more often with each other than boy dogs do. It's just that when girl dogs do, it's a knife fight.
Yeah. It's like cut a bitch.
Yeah. And when boy dogs do, like the boys can have a little tuffle and they can like rough each other up a little bit. And then they can kind of both walk away from it, kind of growly. And then the next day they're like, or 5 minutes later, they're like, you want to get a beer, man? Like that's how they are. And then if the girls come to the point where somebody pulls a knife, you aren't coming back from that. And this is my professional experience. This has also been researched. There's some statistics behind fighting between 2 female dogs being the least resolvable thing that we have on our plates as behavior consultants. That includes separation anxiety, that includes reactivity, that includes like everything. I can try to find that research for you.
I'll find it too.
Yeah, we'll pull that together. And it's in my experience personally, and it's in my experience professionally as well, that when 2 females decide that one of them should move out, you're going to have a really hard time convincing them otherwise. So for me, anytime there's more than one girl, I'm already working really, really hard to support that relationship, because that is thin ice to me, period. This varies by breed for sure. There are, I know people who breed certain breeds of dogs and they've got like 6 or 7 girls and they're all fine. And then I know certain other breeds that like they would never expect the girls to get along. It's just silly to them than anybody would.
Mm-hmm.
The boys can be the same way in certain breeds. There are certain breeds that same-sex directed aggression in or outside the household is expected in the intact males once they reach age 2.5, 3. So knowing the breed that you have is really important. But generally, you asked, what does thin ice look like? And so for me, I'm saying, I know what the recipe is. So if the recipe is already there, that I've got same-sex pairings with big feelings and big personalities, and I've made myself very important to all of them because I do that, because I do sports. So they've all got big feelings about me.
Mm-hmm.
Or that's already, I'm checking that box of the recipe. Then I need to be doing this work to prevent this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, thin ice could look as simple as I'm on the couch and one of my dogs is coming and snuggling up next to me, and my dog that's laying on a bed across the room sees that and gets up and needs to be involved and also gets on the couch and squeezes in between us.
Yeah.
Or distracts me in some other kind of way. Like if Rhea's my Icelandic sheepdog, if she comes over and wants to be affectionate to me, Felix suddenly has a need. He might need to go outside, or he might need me to pet him too, or he might be picking up a toy and being cute. Like he's deliberately distracting me from paying attention to her. So paying attention to what they do when you pay attention to the other one, big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Any kind of tension around any resources. So tension around food, tension around chewies, tension around toys. And that could be stiff body language. That could be giving a little side eye. That could even be growling. It could be I'm chewing my thing and the other dog walks by and doesn't even look at me and I chew it harder or I move it away, right? So all of those things are kind of what thin ice looks like. And then certainly more than thin ice, like you're already in the water and you got to get some help.
Yep.
Is anytime there are repeated or routine words shared between the dogs that are more than what I just described, right? So snapping, growling, snarling. Sometimes the dogs they'll be like a little bit growly as they do the other things I described. So like if I'm petting Rhea and Felix jumps into my lap and also growls, I'm going to consider that no longer on the ice. We are now in the water.
Yeah.
Right. So it is a fine line. And you do need to know, obviously, the individuals that you're working with, because a lot of the individuals that you might be working with have been displaying what we might call thin ice behaviors for like the last 9 years of their life. And probably they're not going to land in the water because they're just going to live there and that's how they're going to express themselves. I would still say taking some steps to support this relationship better is important.
Great. Do you have any thoughts about, I'm sure you do, because anytime I ask you a question
I don't
about
ever
thoughts,
have any thoughts.
never thoughts.
I never do. I don't have any opinion. Or speaking of big feelings,
yeah,
certainly don't have any of those.
I'm curious about, like, I'm thinking about some of the cases that I've had, and I've had a handful of interhousehold stuff that I've consulted with you on, right?
Because it just keeps showing up for you.
I know it keeps showing up for me. It's so weird.
Here it is again and
again. There's a little bit of a break right now, which is kind of nice. So, do you find in your professional experience and your personal experience that like when dogs have a relationship, meaning they like seek each other out, they solicit attention, they're actively engaged in play together, that's better versus just two dogs that are coexisting in the house? Like I'm thinking about Sully. Sully definitely would just coexist with Dakota. There were moments where he would play more when he was physically able, but for the most part, like if we were to interview him, I think he'd be like, I'm tolerating this other dog here and I'm making the best choices I can. And thanks for picking up all the resources so we don't get into like deep water. But there's not really like a social inclination. Like he doesn't really want to hang with her, or he didn't want to hang with her. Whereas, you know, dogs that can have a little bit of an argument or there might be some tension, but like overall, they've got like they do solicit attention from one another.
It's a really good question that has a complicated answer, I think, because I really love it when dogs get true enjoyment from each other.
Same.
So if two dogs are engaging in really beautiful, loose body language, joyous, wiggly play with each other, I think that's really healthy for both of them to have in their lives. So I like to see that. However, the worst cases I've ever worked on of intra-household aggression were cases of the dogs were very close and were really good friends, and now they want each other dead.
Interesting.
It is interesting. To my knowledge, there's not been any like real data taken on this. Also, all of those cases were same-sex cases. So I tend not to see genuine, beautiful play between a male and a female escalate into complete opposite feelings. And again, this is all experience-based. I don't think there's anybody exploring this on this level, on a research level. But I've seen it enough times where it's particularly females, where it's an older female, maybe she's 4 or 5 years older than the other. And when the other female is a puppy, she almost takes on a maternal role. They are good friends. They play a lot. The puppy looks up to her. And I know that I'm like assigning human traits here, but dogs are a social species that does act that way. And when we observe dogs in their wild state, which is, you know, our village, like trash dump dwelling dogs in certain parts of the world, we do sometimes see younger female, older female kind of relationships where we don't see packs forming like wolves, like we talk about. So anyway, and then the people that I know who raise dogs, who raise large numbers of dogs, also talk about this kind of like mother-daughter situation, or sometimes sisters, maybe an older generation sister than the younger one. They can be really good friends and really, really playful and really attached to each other. And then something can happen, like an argument over a resource. Like sometimes things change if one of them has a litter of puppies. There's a lot of different things that can be involved that can then be just a turning point, a tipping point. Sometimes it is that another dog in the household is added, or other times it's that another dog in the household dies, and then something changes, the entire dynamic changes, and now these two girls are literally at each other's throats.
Yeah.
So I'm wary of all of this to say, I am cautious of the dogs developing closer relationships to each other than the one that they have with me. So I don't want to see, for instance, in a household of mine, what I would call like a bonded pair of two dogs. I don't want them to be in distress if I remove a dog from their situation. That's for a lot of reasons other than what we're talking about right now. But I basically don't want them to be best buddies. I don't tend to see households that go from true neutrality to really big fighting problems. what I tend to see is that the dogs had tension all along in the first place. Maybe the
Mhm.
people didn't notice it. And then it can be triggered by, gosh, any number of things, a health concern. One of the dogs develops a painful issue. So many different things can happen. Or they're really, really close and it appears that they are really attached to each other and really have positive feelings towards each other. And this kind of tracks with human relationships. If I am fully neutral about a person, it is unlikely that I'm ever going to develop really strong negative feelings about that person.
Oh, I've never looked at it that way. You're right. It's like if I don't care, I don't care.
If I don't care, I don't care. If I'm ambivalent towards you, then I'm never going to hate you. But the people that I maybe have the strongest negative feelings about in my life, I once was really in love with them, right? And or maybe it's a person that I really, really looked up to and they let me down, right? Or something like that. Or, if I could name a few people who have like a big fat problem with me, it's because we were really close and then I did something that I deserve that for. So I can't say that that's what's going on with dogs, but Marissa, what I will say is that my experience with dogs and looking at their complex relationships with other dogs has always proven that they are just as complex as we are socially.
Yeah.
That this is not black and white. This is not simple. It's never simple. So they're just as complex as we are. They just don't have the same kind of language that we do for expressing these complexities. And so things might seem simpler to the outside observer. But this anecdotal, really close, positive relationships developing into really big, scary situations kind of tracks with human experience a little too much for me to ignore.
Yeah.
And a little too much for me to go, am I making that up? Like, I don't think I am. Because I think there's probably a lot of professionals who might raise an eyebrow at this anecdotal claim that I'm making. And I would welcome that, because I think, could I be making this up myself? But the fact that it tracks so closely with human relationships makes me think that I'm not making it up.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking about, like, if for the listeners, what often I have heard is that, like, as you said, as you track back and you start to understand that relationship between those two dogs, and then it gets even more complicated when there's there's more than two dogs in the home. I do often think that people are just like, oh, there was a spat in the kitchen, it's no big deal. Yeah. Or there was, like, I did notice that, dog A redirected onto dog B when we were out walking, and and dog A had reacted to something out in the environment. No big deal, right? This idea of they'll work it out, and it's like any other relationship, right? Like, we all work it out. Life happens. Things are hard. Things are stressful. I run anxious the way that Sarah does as well. And I'm like worst case scenario girl. And yeah, I think I would really try to avoid just chalking those things up as like, well, it happened once, no big deal. Like, they'll figure it out.
You could be right.
Sure. But the fallout, if you're wrong, is bad.
And this is, again, me running anxious. I could list a few behavior problems for you that I go above and beyond to avoid. And this is one of them. Intra-household fighting is something I go above and beyond to avoid. Separation anxiety being another one.
Yep.
And you know why? Because been there, done that in both cases. Not interested in repeating.
Yeah.
Really hell on earth. And so I was talking to somebody about wildlife chasing actually being another one that I go above and beyond to avoid. And she was kind of like, I don't have it in me to do everything that you're doing to avoid this. Like, I literally don't have the bandwidth. And I said, you know what? That's okay. That's okay for you. That might be okay for you. And so this is, if I have a little spat in my kitchen between two of my dogs and it's over quickly and nobody's hurt, I am not going to brush it off. I am going to call my friends who are professionals and I'm going to say, here's my plan for this. And can you look at it?
Yep.
What do you think? And I'm going to tackle it like it's a problem before it is. Because again, I want to avoid it. And these things happen rarely if I'm doing these steps that we're going to talk about in these dog-to-dog relationships. Certainly one of them being just management and understanding what's going to be okay with your dogs and what's not. So when I am in a household of 8 plus, right? Like if I'm in a household of a ton of dogs, high arousal, high excitement, high importance times, whatever label you want to put on it, are heavily managed because those are your high risk times. So they're not allowed to rush out the door altogether. Okay, so I do, one of my bullet points for this is foundation training. One of the foundation training pieces that I do is that the dogs all understand their name and a release by name in resource type of situations. So if I open a door, I can release each of them out individually by name so that the door is not open and they're not all rushing through it at the same time. I don't know about you, Marissa, but like, how many times we've been talking to a client where there's fighting in the home and the fighting has occurred in thresholds or around thresholds. Yeah. If you dig into where in the house, it's either around food, which is obvious.
Yep.
Or it's around a threshold, which is less obvious to our clients. But it's the same kind of thing.
And also like thresholds, like you said, it reminds me, I feel like some of my clients have picked up like, oh, it's during transitions. It's like when we come home or when we go into another room or
these are high importance times, high arousal time. There are times where there's a spike in the energy in the group. Like there's times where we go from sleepy neutral to not.
Yeah.
So part of the success is that you manage, and the more dogs you have, the more management you must have. I was just explaining to longtime client who's got some fighting going on between two of her dogs, and she's really gotten away with very, very minimal management in her group of dogs for a very long time. But she has 5 dogs, and I told her, you have to face the music. Like, you can't have this like easy lifestyle where they're all together all the time anymore. You don't get to. The more numbers you have, the more dogs you add to a situation, the more likely it is that you're going to need barriers, crates, tethers, dragging leashes. I mean, all kinds of things. What I also find is that the management tools that are easiest on us, easiest on everybody, require a little bit of training. So like barriers. Having a gate between you and the dog, if that's going to cause the dog distress, it's on the other side of the gate. It's now not feasible for you. It's now not an option. If the dog can't be crated in a separate room from you while the other dog is out loose in the house, that's not feasible.
Yeah.
So crate training, comfort with barriers, comfort with muzzles sometimes, depending on your situation. These all require training.
Yeah.
Just like releasing by name requires training. And I've got a few other kind of foundation training tips that we can get into, but essentially the more dogs you have, and maybe you just have 2 and you're listening to this and you're like, I just wanted them to be friends. What are you talking about? We're going to get into that stuff too, because I think all of this is important, even if you only have 2.
Yeah.
And the types of dogs that you have and the sex combinations that you have make it either harder or easier. If you have a male and a female and they're relatively close in age and they're a similar kind of compatible personality type, you are probably okay. You can probably get away without any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what happens is people go to add a second dog to their house a lot of the time, and they don't think about what kind of dog the first dog likes to be around. Like, at one point I was talking to a client of mine, it was golden retrievers, that I love golden retrievers. I think they're fantastic. I think nice, sporty, moderate golden retrievers are lovely, lovely dogs. And also my border collies would have that thing trembling in a corner. Like it would not be compatible in my home.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, like, if I wanted to go get an intact male Doberman, I would be signing myself up for a lifetime of separation as long as Felix is alive. There's no way he would tolerate a dog like that in his home.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing what kind of dog your dog likes when you go to add another dog, I think is something to consider, unless you're willing to go into a lot of management.
Yeah. And that's so, gosh, having worked in sheltering for so many years, it's hard to do. Like, it's hard to really say, like, when you're introducing a dog to another dog at the shelter, right? Like how stressful that is for everyone involved. It's one moment in time. It's one date. Right. But when I see those dogs, like, immediately offering, threat displays or distance increasing behavior, I'm just like, no, I don't. This first date is off to a really bad start. And like the adopter is always like, oh no, but I love this dog. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And right. Like, it's almost like you're starting.
And you need to ask the other family member in your household if they love this dog.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, well, she's just stressed because she's here, or, and you're like, I know, but it's got to be a fit for everyone, even though, like, again, it is just a moment in time. There's a lot of different factors as to why the dogs might be engaging in that way. And I'd love for the date. Like, nobody's like, you know what? I had a really bad first date and I think I'm going to go on like 3 more.
I mean, some people are, but like, we don't need to go into that level of dysfunction. Dogs are not that dysfunctional.
And actually, maybe that's actually not even the real analogy. The analogy is, I went on a pretty bad first date. He or she said some like really outrageous things to me, and I'm going to move in with him. Like, that's actually like her analogy.
That's the analogy.
And honestly, I have coached some of the adoption counselors to like use human analogies like that. And then like some of the adopters would be like, oh yeah, you're right. Maybe we should find a more compatible match, whatever. But yeah, I feel like you're right. We need to be taking into consideration who our dog is and what type of dog they're attracted to or not. And then I love that you brought up the separation piece, Sarah, because I feel like I remember back in the day when we did, for Canine Conversations, Kayla, Ursa, and I did like the top 5 behaviors that you would teach every dog. And it's so funny. My answers would change dramatically from what I answered back then. But one of them is being separate from your dog when you're home. Like, hands down, I feel like that is such a key behavior for so many reasons, right? If you need to put your dog away, but especially if like you said, I need to put dog A away while I'm working with dog B, or like, dog A and dog B have a really hard time when it's in sight separation. So out of sight separation feels better to them. Like, being able to separate your dogs from you while things are happening in the house, I think is such a key skill.
It's a key skill for a lot of reasons. And it's also like a PhD level skill that people just assume will happen for them. They don't work on it.
Yeah.
And so as far as that goes, the dog being able to be separate from you while you are home is a big part of the foundation training for success here.
Mm-hmm.
Other parts of foundation training for success would be simply that the dog has a high repertoire of cues with you, with your person. that with their person. So they understand a lot of different things that you could ask of them. They understand how to go lie on a bed when you ask, or go to a different kind of station. My dogs are like station happy. I can point at anything and tell them to get on it, and they will. In fact, you've been on a walk with me. Felix just tries it. Felix,
oh my gosh, it's ridiculous.
Felix is like, here's a stump.
It's ridiculous.
And then he'll go get on a rock and he'll be like, how about this? And like,
yeah. No, and you actually
everything to an extreme.
Like, we were hiking and you were like, and you had been on that trail before, and the dogs were targeting like specific stumps that you had.
They literally remembered the picture rock that's got the good view behind it. Like, they were like, ooh, this is the rock we get on for cookies.
It was ridiculous. I was like, wow. They're good.
That was funny. That was a fun time. So stationing, being highly, highly fluent, honestly, sit, lie down, nose target, like having a high level of training on the dogs that you have is one of the biggest preventative measures for any behavior problem that you could ever take. I don't care what behavior problem we're talking about. Every single time I get a new client and it's a shit show, like which oftentimes that's my life, because usually if people are signing up for my program, it's because they're drowning. And so it's just this laundry list, and I get in and I'm like, okay, so show me, I just want a video of the stuff your dog knows. Just give me a baseline. And Marissa, 9 times out of 10, they got nothing. They maybe have sit. They don't really have down. They can't walk on a loose leash. They have no concept of that. None. They, certainly can't get on a station, or if they do, they can't stay on it. Sometimes these same exact dogs have like high level agility titles. Okay. But they don't have any like simple, easy stationary cues without conflict or frustration established. And if they know a lot of stuff, then you just have so much more ability to communicate with them. And I would recommend that everybody just trains their dogs to at least have a station behavior, a name recognition, so like recall or release by name, and a downstay, sit stay, whatever, like at least. So that's kind of the foundation training stuff, but recognizing too what's important to the individuals in your house really matters, because the same people who kind of intuitively know that throwing raw bones at everybody in the same room might be a bloodbath, might not know that letting them all run out the back door at the same time might be a bloodbath, right? So understanding what's really important to your dog so that you can manage around those resources to make sure that nobody ever feels that their resources are being threatened. This isn't about your dog's a resource guarder or they're not. Everybody can feel threatened about their stuff or things that are important to them under some conditions. So like if you and I are sitting, we're out to lunch and there's a basket of fries on the table that we're sharing, and we've each got a drink, like I'm not gonna like snatch the basket of fries away from you because I'm not worried about it.
Oh, but Scott, I'm laughing because Scott is worried about it because I eat them so fast.
I will have to say, we haven't shared a basket of fries, so it's possible I'll be worried about it. And truly, me not being worried about it is like due to active work I've done to not be worried about it. But like, here's the contrast. Rando walks up to the table and reaches for our basket of fries.
Totally.
We're both threatened immediately.
Yeah.
Right.
But maybe we weren't threatened with each other, right? Or maybe we're not threatened in general.
Because of this history of you've never taken anything of mine, I don't take anything of yours, and we have a history of positive reinforcement together. So that's where my 3 dogs can eat their frozen Kongs in the morning all loose together. That's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
No way would I invite a friend's dog over to also partake in that enjoyment. Like, no way. I would separate everybody if somebody else's dog came over to also have a Kong, right? Yeah. So knowing what's important to them and making sure that you put the management in place to make sure nobody feels threatened ever, really important. And that could mean that they're created for meal times or separated in another way. When they get to have a bone, they get to have it by themselves. Maybe they're in an X-pen. If you have a chronic bone stealer in your house, if one of your dogs is that jerk who goes and takes everybody's stuff, put that dog in an X-pen with his bone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, just do some separation, make sure you know the individuals and that you put down the management that feels important for nobody to feel threatened.
Yeah. And it's almost like, it's like being the advocate for that other dog, right? There's so many times where I have met with clients and I'm like, oh, does that always happen? And they're like, oh yeah, dog B doesn't care. And I'm like, like,
are you sure dog B doesn't care? Did you ask?
Are you sure dog B doesn't care? And like, what if he decides to care next week?
Yeah.
And what if he decides to care, like his escalated response is now growling, but then like the following week it's snapping. It's just like, we don't really, it feels unnecessary to me in terms of allowing it to continue.
Anything that, it doesn't even matter if you perceive threat, anything that is one dog taking the stuff of the other dog, don't allow it.
Yeah.
Don't allow it. I don't care what the other dog acts like. There are definitely dogs who are so conflict avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
You've experienced this in your caseload. I know you have, and so have I, where you've got a resident dog that is so conflict avoidant that this young jerk that this person has adopted just beats the crap out of this dog every day, trying to get them to play. They're biting at them. Mm-hmm. They're jumping at them. They're jumping at like they're like, well, he doesn't mind. And I'm like, no, he minds. I guarantee you he'd be happier without this going on.
Yeah. He's
just so conflict averse that it's easier for him to just take it.
Yeah.
I've been in situations like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like how, like you think of like, I don't know, maybe a boss or something like that, that is just, I had a boss that was straight up abusive. It was so much easier to just keep my head down and take it than to try to argue with her or try to defend myself.
Yeah.
Because she held all the cards, right? I could just lose my job. So paying attention to, like, not allowing dogs to bully or torment other dogs, really high on the list.
Yeah.
Seems obvious, but high on the list.
Mm-hmm. One thing you said earlier that I really want to highlight when you said, figure out what your dogs are valuing, right? So if that means that they value to get outside first, or maybe it's not even first, it's just that like they value to go outside. And so they're rushing, right? I do think it's, this is important in general, but it is really important to say like, okay, just because I don't value it, or I don't see a need for my dog to value it, doesn't mean the dog doesn't value it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's almost like,
you don't decide what's valuable to them.
Yeah. It's like, oh, he doesn't really need to react to that. Or like, gosh, he doesn't need to be a jerk and push through the door and like knock the other dog over. It's like, well, for some reason
or it's like, I've given everybody a Kong.
He doesn't need to steal the other dog's
He doesn't
Kong.
need to worry about anybody else taking his, he has his, and he doesn't need to steal anyone else's. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather than assigning those things, just look at what's happening.
Yeah.
Be as objective as you can,
really,
in assessing what's happening. And that kind of leads me to one of the other points, which is just having good, and I'm going to operationalize that, handler or owner involvement. So if we have good handler involvement, I'm going to use the word handler because there are no great words for the person that you sometimes say pet parent, sometimes people say guardian, whatever. The handler involvement looks like this. I notice that the puppy is tormenting you, and I make it stop before you think you have to. I know that this dog is obnoxious and is going to steal everybody's Kong, so I put him in an X-pen to have Kong time. I am aware of the fact that this young dog is going to bulldoze you going through the back door. So I make sure and hold him back to let you get yourself out and into the yard before I take him into the yard. Like that's all. Management is good handler involvement. And what I find to be true is that, and this is living with herding dogs who are really known to be the control freaks of the dog world, which could be why I relate to them so hard and could be why I love them so much. But to operationalize that, they're designed to control large portions of livestock. I always say, like, the border collie is designed to care that sheep number 398 is like veering out of the flock. When like your more normal dog breeds are like, I got most of them. Like that's how they're designed. Border collies are not designed like that. They're designed to get sheep number 398, get him back in line, get like that. They're really, really concerned with everything being in order and there not being any chaos. So it's my job then to do that for them. Because if I don't do it for them, they'll do it. And I might not like how they do it.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes the biggest tough cases I've worked on were with agility people who had some normal breed. Like I'm thinking of one household that she had 2 lovely Labradors and she got a border collie to do agility with. And this is just a classic story. They have some normal nice dog. They start doing agility with their normal nice dogs. And then they decide they want to do agility with something faster. They get a border collie. Never mind the fact that it's not just something faster. Everything about this dog is different from the other dogs that you've had, right? And now border collie is literally making the lives of the lovely normal dogs in your house hell. Because they were fine doing their thing. And now the border collie is micromanaging them. Like they get up to go, maybe they go to run down the driveway to get a cookie from the UPS driver every day. Not on the border collie's watch. Border collie is going to get in your way from the door, block you from the door. I mean, like they're going to dive in and target, they're going to bite you. So it's your job to be that good handler, have that involvement where if the border collie thinks that the Labrador is running to the UPS guy is too chaotic, but you'd like the Labradors to still have that in their lives, then give the border collie another task during that time. Right? Like it's so important that you are in there doing that. You don't get to just say, I don't want him to do that, make him stop. You won't be successful. So all good handler involvement, really, really important to inspire good relationships in the dogs. They'll have good relationships if you are on top of managing those relationships.
And I think one of the skills I've learned from many colleagues is just get a bunch of video, of your dogs and slow that down, right? Watch it frame by frame. And gosh, because there's so much going on. And so maybe one of the ways in which you can become more fluent in your observation skills, just like video a bunch of their behavior and reviewing it back, because a lot of what you're talking about is like being really clear about what are the antecedents in the environment that are causing the behavior, what are the consequences for the individual animals, and then how do I proactively or preventatively reduce that behavior from happening in the future. And lots of times people are like, well, how do I even figure out what the antecedents are? And it's like, well, maybe take a step back, start videoing, slowing things down. And I feel like you can get a little bit more information. Like I have one client who's tracking all these things, right? Like just really, like we've got a spreadsheet, just tracking, okay, what is happening right before, what's happening right after, like all like getting really, really curious about this stuff, because that's how you're going to gain your handler awareness. in my opinion. Like there are moments with my foster dog right now. And Sarah has heard me on the phone a million times with this foster dog. I have completely lost all of my skills. Like literally out the window.
I believe my exact words to you were pull your head out of your ass and act like a behavior consultant.
Literally. And I'm like, oh wow, I just made a mistake, but I know I made a mistake, right? Like, whereas like folks, right? Like I'm like, oh, that was a mistake.
Right.
Next time I want to do it this way. And so I'm just thinking about like a novice person going like, I don't know when I'm making mistakes. It's like,
yeah. And like this case of the Labradors and the Border Collie, like she was like, oh, when I made it clear to her what was going on, because why would she know?
Yeah, exactly.
That's why the Border Collie was acting like that. Or how would she know how to handle it? Yeah. So I do think some of the things are easy if we look at it like nobody should be like tormenting, nagging at, bullying. Mm-hmm. Those are kind of words that we understand. Sometimes your clients are going to go, I don't know what that looks like. And that's when, yes, video, let's get all of that. Sometimes I'll have clients say this dog bullies the other dog. And I'll say, I don't know what that means. Can you explain it to me? And they'll try, and I still don't know. And I get the video and I'm like, okay, well, that's not a word I would use. But fine, great. Like, here's what's happening. Let's break it down. Yep. Videoing the interactions with your dogs, talking to a lot of people who have multiple dogs too, and kind of saying, do your dogs do this? Like what, like getting fluent in what normal might look like for a variety of households also might help. So that's kind of good handler involvement being one of my bullet points. And yes, it is going to be a learning curve for a lot of people. And it can take time, and allow yourself that grace too. Yeah.
I mean, and it takes time for me as a behavior consultant. I can only imagine, right? Yeah. If you're going from a single dog household to multiple dogs, like, yeah, that's a skill that you have not cultivated.
Yeah. And especially situations of like blended households, situations that literally go from 1 to 4 overnight or 1 to 5.
Yep.
Whew. Like that's a learning curve for everybody. So that's where that foundation training and that separation comes in. Don't throw them all together. Let's have some separation for a while. Right.
Yeah. This like normalizing separation, I think, is so critical for folks, because I'm just really like, important. I'm like, well, how often are they together? And they're like, oh, they're together like pretty much a lot of the time.
What do you mean? How often are they together?
Right? like they are together, you know? And I'm like, we need more separation. And I don't think we need, like, we can do it in a really positive way. I do want to plug, it's not the same, but all the principles are there. I do want to plug your crate classes. Yeah. Happy Crating. Yeah. Happy Crating. And we'll link to that. But I think it can be done in a really great way. Doesn't need to be punishing, like dog loses access to you or dog loses access to other dog. But I do think that that's critical, like to really normalize that separation. Like it's okay. Are their needs met throughout the day and other avenues? Great. Then they can be separated, and they can have some of that sort of away downtime. And they might actually want it. Like
they do want it. How do you want to be with the person you live with 24/7?
No.
Go ahead and laugh. Like, no, of course you don't. No. Nobody does.
Yeah.
Separation is important. It is important that they're not together all the time. And yes, there's some foundation training required to make that okay with them. And which usually is about being separate from you, not from the other dogs. It's just the fact that there can be some really big feelings about a dog being separate when the person is home and the other dogs are still also out. Yes. And about, right? So it's not necessarily, okay, lock this dog in a room for 2 hours a day, whatever. It's not like that. It's not isolation. It's just making sure that they aren't together all the time, because maybe you take one dog out and train it and the other 2 are hanging out in crates with Bones, and switch it up, right? Yeah. It's really about providing really highly enriched lives for them, that they have individual time with you, and it's not always the group. And they can be separated from each other when you're not home, which is in general a good idea. They can be together in the same room, but barriers between them when you're not home
Yeah.
is the smartest thing that you can do.
Yeah.
To avoid really disastrous things that can
Yeah.
happen.
And now we can watch, right? Like there's like amazing,
Oh yeah, get a camera.
it's like, get a camera.
There's so many different ones. There's so many different
Yep.
cheap, easy options for that now.
Mm-hmm.
The other two really big deal things that I do, one of them is what I'm going to call mutual enjoyment activities. So we just talked about them being separate and getting to do nice things with you separate from the other dogs. It's important that you do deliberate mutual enjoyment things with them to maintain good relationships. And what that looks like is they go on walks together, maybe. Again, it has to be enjoyable. If one of your dogs is a mess out on walks in the world, that's probably not enjoyable for either of them. So when I say on walks, if you know me, you know that I don't mean put them on a leash and walk them around your suburban neighborhood. When I say on a walk, I mean off leash, in nature, time to just be together. My dogs
on long lines, just in case folks that like don't have that
on long lines, if off leash is not accessible to you, and handling 2 long lines can get really, really hard, and not to mention handling more than 2. So again, if not accessible, then maybe you do take them on individual long line walks, but they go on together shorter leash walks. It's just important that they do actually enjoy them, that they sniff and they meander and they're not too triggered by anything in the environment. So other ways to have mutual enjoyment are things like food-based enrichment, like chewing and snuffling and things like that. Just utilize those management pieces. They don't have to be on separate planets. There can be an X pen down the middle of the room and they're mutually enjoying a food puzzle. Meal times can be spent together. If they are in crates next to each other, they're together enjoying their meal. I look at training. I do a lot of training. I know not everybody does, but I look at training sometimes as mutual enjoyment if it's the type of training where I've got 2 dogs stationed and I'm working one and I switch them out. So I do this kind of musical dogs situation where I'm training one for a 30-second, 2-minute burst, putting him on a station, releasing the next dog and working them. This supports my foundation training because
I was just going to say,
I release by name. Again, it's stationing and release by name, really important. And they all, I think, get a kick out of it when we do that. Even when they're learning to stay on their station, they're still getting fed and getting positive reinforcement for being on their station and being off the station. So that's a mutual enjoyment activity that I also do. Can you think of any other mutual enjoyment things? It's kind of just enrichment things, like any enrichment activity that
I was thinking about like or choosing environments outside, but we've already really talked about this, but like choosing environments outside that there are a lot of organic opportunities for them to be sniffing, right? Like instead of just like,
sure, like it could be yard time. If the yard is nicely enriched and we're not mutually cussing out the neighbor dog, we're mutually sniffing around. I will do a big kibble scatter in the grass and all of my dogs will eat it. And my dogs don't fight over that. And these are the same dogs that like would fight over eating out of a bowl together. It's unusual that they will fight over a big kibble scatter in vegetation. If they will, they're pretty guardy. I mean, if they will, they're pretty ready to fight over stuff like that.
And I think that's a really good point in terms of like whenever I'm talking to my clients about this, I'm like, okay, so when we deliver food to their mouths and they're like right next to one another, how do they react? When we deliver food to the ground, how do they react? Right. Right. Like getting really clear about.
Yeah. If I've got a dog that's going to get snarky at another dog in the big kibble scatter in the grass kind of situation, we're on thin ice. Like that's thin ice in that relationship. There are dogs that I don't want Felix, for instance, to do that kibble scatter near. because their relationship isn't strong enough.
Mm-hmm.
Versus just with my two girls, Iggy and Rhea, it's not a problem. They can literally be like nose to nose snuffling in the same spot. And you can set that up to be as safe as you need it to be. I've got an intra-household aggression case right now that we've got each member of the household has one of the dogs on leash. They're about 20 feet apart and they're both doing a big scatter in the grass together.
Mm-hmm.
This is their mutual enjoyment that they're doing. We need those leashes and we need that distance. We need those barriers set up to make that safe. And then the other one that it's a little bit interesting that it doesn't occur to people, but also I think the reason it doesn't occur to people is it seems like this might be what you're already doing, but there are some pieces to it that make it a little bit different, which is just deliberate low risk time spent together. So low risk times are going to be times that are at no risk of escalating in intensity. So if I'm watching TV and all my dogs are sleeping in the room, I'm going to call that a low risk time. Mm-hmm. Unless somebody's on their way over. So I know that this will intensify at some point. Unless Amazon might knock on the door. Unless, like, there are all of these little pieces of, if there's a chance that this will escalate, it is not a low risk time. Mm-hmm. Why is that important? It's important because a lot of times dogs see each other, and I do think this is more important. It's more important that you avoid it intensifying at all if you already have conflict. If you don't already have conflict, you just want ways to diffuse the intensity if it does happen. If you already have conflict, you need to make sure that there's no risk of it intensifying. Because if you already have conflict, they're already looking at each other like a high risk scenario. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like if every single time you're with somebody, it's some big thing. There's some drama, you have to have an argument, you have to talk, or you're doing some big thing together, like some big intensity thing, you're going to a concert, like whatever. Like this is just never a low-key friend. Think about your feelings about that friend versus the friend that you would be totally happy to just like sit in a room and watch a movie with and like not talk during the movie. Mm-hmm. Think about the difference between your feelings about those two people. Now, which one would you feel more amenable to the idea of living with? This is a no-brainer. Of course, the one that you're cool sitting on the couch watching a movie with.
Yeah.
Right? We've all had that friend or maybe that romantic relationship that was like just literally a freaking roller coaster every single second of the time. And at some point, it flew off the rails, didn't it? At some point, it had to end. It can't go on like that. So,
or like you said, in small doses, it's like you can be around that person in small doses, but like living with, that's a big deal.
Live with that person. So for instance, our friend Lisa has this adorable dog, Simon. And I was
thinking of Lisa actually, because you
could just chill with Lisa.
Oh, you could just chill, like you could just like, yeah.
So easy to be around.
I was thinking of Lisa. It's so funny.
Lisa's very easy to be around.
Very easy.
Her dog Simon's a little different though.
It's a little different.
So I will go on walks with my dogs with Simon all the time. But it's Simon and my dogs have like one of those more roller coaster relationships.
Totally.
Trying to integrate Simon into my house. That would be a nightmare to me.
It'd be a lot.
It would be a lot. He's not a dog that I would choose to integrate into my home. Like if I had to, I could. And it's because of my dogs. It's not another reason. I've hung out with him in his apartment without any other dogs. He's a lot, but he's very charming and funny. And I love him. I think he's great. I think Felix would hate him. He'd be way too much for Felix.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And he and Rhea would be non-stop. And I would hate them.
Yeah.
Because that's how they are on walks. They're both barking. and they're both running full speed and it just never stops.
Oh my God. Sign me up to live with that.
So really having intentional low risk, low intensity times, especially if I had Rhea and Simon living in the same house, this would be vital.
So would that be something like, okay, so we go out, we have our off leash walks. Everybody's needs are met from like a physical, emotional standpoint. And then I purposely have you all together in a same room, relaxing, because you're likely to relax at that point. Correct?
Yeah. So certainly set up your antecedents so that they're likely to come home and crash.
Okay.
And then use leashes or tethers or other barriers if you need to. Like Simon and Rhea might still want to
party.
They might be like, we rested in the car, we're fine.
Yeah. Totally.
But if you put them both on a tether, they'd probably both actually go to sleep. So just arranging your antecedents so that everybody chills. One of my favorite low intensity activities is to just put both the dogs in crates in the car. So if I have two dogs that have conflict with each other that are living together and I'm managing the situation kind of chronically, which is something I've certainly lived many times, I will put those two dogs in crates next to each other in the car and I'll go to the grocery store. Obviously, when it's not too hot, don't come at me.
She's in a shaded parking
I live
garage.
in the Northwest. It's never hot. And then they're just sleeping next to each other. So this is just, there is literally zero risk of them having a fight because they're in crates. And they're both really comfortable being in crates in the car. So they're not going to freak out that they're being left. And it's deliberate low intensity.
Would you recommend like filming that? Because I'm like, there's a part of me that's like,
you need to know. You don't know, you need to know. Yeah. What if one of them is actually
like direct staring the whole
at the
time?
other one?
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe it is that like to prevent that entirely, you throw sheets over the crates.
Put a barrier between them. And if they have conflict and it's wire crates, there's a barrier because that's not a strong enough barrier. So I would prefer plastic crates so that they can't actually get to each other. And or put a piece of cardboard between the two crates so that they can't access each other. Or they're just in separate kind of parts of the car, right? So certainly you need to know if it's truly low risk or not. If one of the dogs is really reactive when they're in the car, like to people walking by or whatever else, it's a no-go. It's not going to be a low intensity time because that dog will be chronically reactive. And the other dog shouldn't be exposed to that. In the car. Those low intensity times could be like you're doing homework with your kids and one of them is in an X pen over there and one of them's in an X pen over here. They're just apart from each other. Or if they don't need to be separated, they're just here laying down. Like you're like, okay, nothing exciting is going to happen for the next 45 minutes. This is a good low risk time for the dogs to spend together.
I have a question about attention, like giving the dogs attention. Like let's say we noticed that there is some feelings, like you said, like the example in the beginning of the podcast of, okay, I give Sully attention. Oh, that's so sad to use him as an example. He's not here anymore. But like I give Sully attention because I remember like Dakota would then like walk up, and it's so interesting because he escalated towards her and he would do it with a freeze and then a lunge and snarling. And it's so funny that she would put herself into some of these scenarios. And I'm like, girl, like anyway. So let's say I'm giving him attention and
that motivation that was worth it to her.
He is worth it to her. Right. So she'd like come in and get the attention from me. And again, like it was never a problem for Sully that I would then give her attention, but to me, that felt high risk. So I would just like stand up and walk away because I'm just like, you know what? I'm not a resource anymore. I'm not valuable anymore. And I would try to give the dogs individual attention, right? Like I would try to make sure that I was engaging with Dakota, giving her attention when Sully was away. But how do you, I know this is a complicated answer.
It's a really complicated question because if you've got an established resource guarding of the person problem, my answer is going to be different than if you have very subtle, I need to be petted too if you're petting him.
Okay, let's go with that one.
Like that. Yeah.
Let's go with that one.
Because again, I said at the top, that's a thin ice behavior.
Sure.
Right. So for me, I'm paying very, very close attention to them and I'm shaping the behavior I want to see. And isn't that the goddamn answer to everything you've ever asked me? But
yeah,
but
I need to hear you say it.
Let's say that Felix is my little spoon. Okay. Like he needs to be touching me like all the time. So let's say I'm in the recliner and he's literally laying on top of me and his head is like,
oh my gosh, I can't,
on my neck. And Rhea comes over and jumps up next to me and is standing on my shoulder, inspecting my nostrils and my face, because that's what she does.
Mm-hmm.
I continue to do everything I already was doing with Felix. And I'm paying attention and I'm watching. And if he's neutral to her, I'm actually like increasing my affection towards him.
Mm-hmm.
And if he is side-eyeing her, then I am decreasing my affection towards him.
Okay.
And I might then, and I will even like acknowledge her. And if he remains neutral, come back and really acknowledge him and really love up on him. All of this is very dangerous if they're actually going to break into a fight on top.
Totally.
Right. So I don't want somebody to go do this if they aren't like sure of what they're seeing and they aren't positive that that's not going to escalate to that point. But the other thing that I've done is straight up train the other dog to do something else to get me to stop petting the other dog other than invade the space. So like in the case of Iggy, who I would label her a resource guarder in a few different capacities, and one of them being she will guard me against other dogs. Isn't necessarily about I'm giving her affection and she doesn't want the other dog to be a part of that because she's not even that affectionate. I'm just a resource to her. Mm-hmm. So one of the scenarios that would happen a lot is my parents have these two pugs and she'd get really barky kind of nasty, barky, kind of snarky at them if they would jump up on my lap and she was like laying next to me on the couch or even next to me on the ground. Again, here we come back to foundation training. I would ask her to hop off and I would ask her to lie down or sit. Every single time this would happen, the pug would come over. I would ask her to do something. She did it and I'd put the pug on the ground. So I'm saying to her, I will stop engaging them. You have to do what I ask. Mm-hmm. And it became, she could be laying on the ground and a pug would get on my lap and she'd get pissed about it, right? So a pug would come and jump on my lap and she would walk over and sit and look at me. And I would put the pug on the ground.
Because that's been reinforced.
Because that's the function of that behavior for her.
That's been reinforced.
The function for her is don't touch the pug. It's not petting me. It's don't touch the pug. So you really do need to understand the function.
And it's not food.
Don't you always? It's never food.
Yeah.
Well, it's not food if what you're guarding isn't food.
Yeah.
It's not food. Did I train her those behaviors with food as a reinforcer? Yes, I did. Am I using food to reinforce them now? No, I'm not. Because it's not the function. The function is stop touching the pug. So I'd put the pug on the ground. So it's always know what the function is and respond accordingly. Felix just wants me to keep petting him. He doesn't want another dog coming over to mean that we stop this interaction.
We stop the interaction. Yep.
So it's been working really well for me to just continue and potentially increase the interaction if the other dog comes closer. And then I will be, full disclosure, if he growls at her or looks at her, I tell him to get off of my lap.
Mm-hmm.
He's not allowed to lay there and growl. That alone would not fix this problem.
Yep.
It's that paired with my shaping of the behaviors that I do want to see.
Yeah. Well, and that's also appropriate for you to ask him to get off, not necessarily that you're with the intention of
changing behavior, but
changing
in that
behavior,
moment,
but like,
I do need him to not lay on me and growl. So I'm going to ask him to get off.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Because it's not safe. Right. So there isn't a good, clean answer to it because it really depends on the function of the behavior of the dog in front of you.
Yeah.
But in general, you can teach them, me petting this dog means I'll pet you next. You absolutely can. And I teach them that with food too. Like I teach that name release. I teach it with food. I have a tub of yogurt and I say your name and then I give you the yogurt. And then I take it away and I say another dog's name and I give them the yogurt. And if you try to come invade, I block you or I take the yogurt away. I say somebody else's name and I give them the yogurt. And basically your name means you eat the yogurt. And I can do the exact same thing with petting. I can say Felix and I can pet him. And then I can say Rhea and I can pet her. And then I can go right back to Felix and pet him.
Yeah.
And if you want to get like really fancy and slick about it, Leslie McDevitt has a protocol where she teaches one dog to like literally give a start button behavior for you to feed the other dog because they know then it buys them food again.
Oh, fun.
She has a name for it. She has a name for it and we'll find it and we'll put it in the notes because I don't remember what it is.
Okay.
Because all her little games have names and I don't remember what the name of this one is. I think it might actually be like a sharing protocol or something like that, but we'll find it for everybody. Okay. So you can get that deep into it, but it really does depend on the function.
Yeah.
I would try not to reinforce the invader.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
But just not reinforcing it is probably going to cause it to escalate and like you have to have other things in place too, for sure.
Awesome.
Well, we've hit literally every corner of the earth on this one. I don't know.
A ton. Yeah.
As we do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. This was super helpful. And I hope that this met the listeners' needs. And I'm excited to, I'm so tired right now. I don't remember what I'm going to say. No, my allergies are really starting.
Mine are terrible. I literally woke up at 3 a.m. and was just like snot, like it was terrible. It was itchy. Ugh.
Okay, Laurel, we're editing that part out.
Edit my snot.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here and for talking about this complicated topic that is ongoing, right? So this is such a great episode for folks to listen to, just ongoing reminders as to how to support the relationship with your dogs, because relationships, you don't arrive to some place, right? So we want to support it ongoing. So thank you for your perspective.
You're welcome. And I definitely have I have a course kind of in the works on this. It'll be a self-study course that will be available and we'll get that link to everybody when it's ready.
Awesome. So I'm excited to take that course. I've been telling you.
You've been like, when is that coming?
For months now. I'm like, we need the course.
Are you done yet?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.